Hello, thank you for joining with me. We are in chapter 31, the final vision. This is the concluding chapter of the text in A Course in Miracles. We are reading with the Course Companions group, and I'm pretty sure I'm very far behind. And this is the final vision, section 1, the simplicity of salvation. Please join me in prayer. Dear Father, if left to my own devices, my perception will be skewed. I surrender to you everything that I think and feel. God, please take my past, plan my future, send your Spirit to redeem my mind, that I might be set free. May I be your channel, God, and serve the world. May I become who you would have me be, do what you would have me do, go where you would have me go, and say what you would have me say, and to whom, dear God. God, I thank you for my many, many blessings. Please allow me to set aside everything I think I know for an open mind and a new experience. And so it is. Amen. The simplicity of salvation. How simple is salvation? All it says is what was never true is not true now and never will be. The impossible has not occurred and can have no effects. And that is all. Can this be hard to learn by anyone who wants it to be true? Only unwillingness to learn it could make such an easy lesson difficult. How hard it is to see that what is false cannot be true, and what is true cannot be false. You can no longer say that you perceive no differences in false and true. You have been told exactly how to tell one from the other, and just what to do if you become confused. And we're going to read footnote 1. The Course teaches throughout that you have confused the false and true, which includes confusing the world and reality, the ego and yourself, body and mind, pain and joy, imprisonment and freedom, death and life. It is the Holy Spirit's role to separate the true from the false in your mind and to teach you to tell them apart. What is true, he teaches, is characterized by love, not fear, wholeness, not lack, and sharing, not exclusion. The true and false are told apart through a process of comparing everything with the higher level of creation. The Holy Spirit, therefore, teaches you to judge every thought that you allow to enter in the light of what God put there, to look upon darkness through light. And now we will go back to the text. Why then do you persist in learning not such simple things? There is a reason, but confuse it not with difficulty in the simple things salvation asks you learn. It teaches but the very obvious. It merely goes from one apparent lesson to the next, in easy steps which lead you gently from one to another with no strain at all. This cannot be confusing, yet you are confused. For somehow you believe that what is totally confused is easier to learn and understand. What you have taught yourself is such a giant learning feat that it is indeed incredible. But you accomplished it because you wanted to and did not pause in diligence to judge it hard to learn or too complex to grasp. No one who understands what you have learned, how carefully you have learned it, and the pains in which you went to practice and repeat the lessons endlessly in every form you could conceive of them, could ever doubt the power of your learning skill. There is no greater power in the world. The world was made by it and even now depends on nothing else. The lessons you have taught yourself have been so overlearned and fixed. They rise like heavy curtains to obscure the simple and the obvious. Footnote 2. To overlearn means to continue to study and memorize well past the point of initial mastery, so that one attains automatic recall. The term figures prominently in this section and reappears in the first paragraph of section 3 of this chapter. Now back to the text. Say not, you cannot learn them, for your power to learn is strong enough to teach you that your will is not your own. Your thoughts do not belong to you, and even you are someone else. Who could maintain that lessons such as these are easy? Yet you have learned more than this. You have continued, taking every step, however difficult, without complaint, until a world was built that suited you. And every lesson that makes up the world arises from the first accomplishment of learning, an enormity so great that the Holy Spirit's voice seems small and still before its magnitude. Footnote 3, 1 Kings 19:12. And after the earthquake a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire a still small voice. In the above reference, the Holy Spirit's voice is not actually still and small. As explained later, it contains the power of God's will. Yet the magnitude of what we taught ourselves is so enormous that it has drowned out his mighty voice, making it seem still and small. See 6, 1 through 3 for further discussion of this. Back to the text. The world began with one strange lesson, powerful enough to render God forgotten and his Son an alien to himself, in exile from the home where God himself established him. You who have taught yourself the Son of God is guilty, say not that you cannot learn the simple things salvation teaches you. Learning is an ability you made and gave yourself. It was not made to do the will of God, but to uphold a wish that it could be opposed. And that will, apart from it, was yet more real than it. And this has learning sought to demonstrate. And you have learned what it was made to teach. Now does your ancient overlearning stand implacable before the voice of truth and teach you that its lessons are not true, too hard to learn, too difficult to see, and too opposed to what is really true. Yet you will learn them, for their learning is the only purpose for your learning skill the Holy Spirit sees in all the world. His simple lessons in forgiveness have a power mightier than yours because they call from God and from yourself to you. Is this a little voice, so small and still it cannot rise above the senseless noise of sounds which have no meaning? God willed not his Son forget him, and the power of his will is in the voice that speaks for him. Which lessons will you learn? Which outcome is inevitable, sure as God, and far beyond all doubt or question? Can it be your little learning, strange in outcome and incredible in difficulty, will withstand the simple lessons being taught to you in every moment of each day since time began and learning had been made? The lessons to be learned are only two. Each has its outcome in a different world, and each world follows surely from its source. The certain outcome of the lesson that God's Son is guilty is the world you see. It is a world of terror and despair, nor is there hope of happiness in it. There is no plan for safety you can make that will ever succeed. There is no joy that you can seek for here and hope to find. But this is not the only outcome which your learning can produce. However much you may have overlearned your chosen task, the lesson that reflects the love of God is stronger still, and you will learn God's Son is innocent and see another world. The outcome of the lesson that God's Son is guiltless is a world in which there is no fear, and everything is lit with hope and sparkles with a gentle friendliness. Nothing but calls to you in soft appeal to be your friend and let it join with you. And never does its call remain unheard, misunderstood, or left unanswered in the tongue in which the call itself was made. And you will understand it is this call that everyone and everything within the world has always made, but you had not perceived it as it was. And now you see you were mistaken. You have been deceived by forms the call was hidden in, and so you did not hear it and had lost a friend who always wanted to be part of you. The soft, eternal calling of each part of God's creation to the whole is heard throughout the world. This second lesson brings. There is no living thing that does not share the universal will that it be whole, and that you do not leave its call unheard. Without your answer it is left to die, and it is saved from death when you have heard its calling as the ancient call to life, and understood that it is but your own. The Christ in you remembers God with all the certainty with which he knows his love. But only if his Son is innocent can he be love. For God were fear indeed if he whom he created innocent could be a slave to guilt. God's perfect Son remembers his creation, but in guilt he has forgotten what he really is. The fear of God results as surely from the lesson that his Son is guilty as God's love must be remembered when he learns his innocence. For hate must father fear and look upon its father as itself. Footnote 4. Hate must father fear means that hate gives rise to fear of punishment, and look upon hate's father as itself seems to mean that hate makes an image of God in its own likeness. We therefore see a hateful God, whose anticipated punishment is the source of our fear. Back to the text. How wrong are you who fail to hear the call that echoes past each seeming call to death, that sings behind each murderous attack and pleads that love restore the dying world. You do not understand who calls to you beyond each form of hate, each call to war. But you will recognize him as you give him answer in the language that he calls. He will appear when you have answered him, and you will know in him that God is love. Footnote 5. 1 John 4:8. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. He in the sentence, he will appear when you have answered him, refers to Christ, the self, who everyone in truth has not been calling for war, but for love. I'm going to repeat that. He will appear when you have answered him refers to Christ, the self who calls to us beyond each form of hate. When he appears, we will finally see that everyone in truth has not been calling for war, but love. We will realize it is the loving Christ in everyone, not the warlike ego, who has been calling to us. And seeing his innocence, we will finally realize the nature of his source. This seems to be the meaning of, and you will know in him that God is love. What is temptation but a wish to make the wrong decision on what you would learn and have an outcome which you do not want? It is the recognition that it is a state of mind unwanted that becomes the means whereby the choice is reassessed. Another outcome seen to be preferred. You are deceived if you believe you want disaster and disunity and pain. Hear not the call for this within yourself, but listen rather to the deeper call beyond it that appeals for joy and peace. And all the world will give you joy and peace, for as you hear, you answer, and behold, your answer is the proof of what you learned. Its outcome is the world you look upon. And now I will read the commentary by Robert Perry, day 355, The Simplicity of Salvation. Let's be honest, the Course seems objectively difficult. It's asking us, after all, to learn unconditional forgiveness. Who finds that easy? Indeed, the people who say it's easy are the ones who worry me. Either they're not facing what's really being asked of them, or they're not facing how much they fall short, or both. It seems much healthier to admit that the Course is hard and then try to be equal to the task. In this section, however, Jesus turns that perspective completely on its head. He begins by saying that salvation is inherently easy. All it says is what was never true is not true and never will be. It takes us through a series of easy steps which lead you gently from one to another with no strain at all. Does any of that sound hard? Why then do we find it all so difficult? The reason goes back to the origin of the world, when we decided to teach ourselves a single unbelievable lesson. God's Son is guilty. The lesson makes absolutely no sense. How could a chip off the holiest block of all be guilty? Yet we did not pause in diligence to judge it hard to learn or too complex to grasp. Instead, we took pains to practice and repeat the lesson endlessly, in every form we could think of, until we literally overlearned it. As the footnote explains, to overlearn means to continue to study and memorize well past the point of initial mastery, so that one attains automatic recall. To understand our situation, imagine that at some point you falsely decided that your parents were Satanists and had ritually abused you as a child. As hard to believe as this was, you worked diligently to protect that idea and label any competing thoughts that entered your mind as self-betrayal. Then imagine that you built your world around this idea. You only associated with individuals and groups who had a similar belief. Everywhere you looked then were people and books and films that echoed this same idea. Finally, as you looked around at all this confirming evidence, rather than questioning it, you interpreted it from the standpoint of your prior belief that your parents really did this, so that your belief and your world fused into one. At that point, how easy would it be to learn the obvious lesson that your parents were good, well-intentioned people who never did any such thing. That is the situation you are in. You not only ingrained in your mind the incredible lesson that God's Son is guilty, you built a world based on it, and then you interpreted that world from its vantage point. And now the Course comes along trying to teach you the obvious truth that God's Son, the Son of purity itself, is innocent, and you find it utterly counterintuitive and nearly impossible to learn. The good news is that as stubbornly rooted as your learning seems, it is nowhere near as powerful as the lessons the Holy Spirit aims to teach you. His simple lessons in forgiveness have a power mightier than yours because they call from God and from yourself to you. For this reason, Jesus assures you that in the end you will learn them. In truth, there are only two lessons. God's Son is guilty or God's Son is guiltless. How then do we finally devote ourselves to learning the second lesson? The answer is actually very simple. We compare the outcomes of the two lessons. And since each lesson results in its own world, this means that we compare those two worlds. The world that results from the lesson that God's Son is guilty is the familiar world of terror and despair. We know this outcome all too well. What then is the world that results from the lesson that God's Son is guiltless? It is a world that sparkles with a gentle friendliness, a world in which everything is calling to you in soft appeal to be your friend and let it join with you. In this world, you hear these soft appeals and you often respond to each one with a joyous, of course. As you do, you understand that in truth you have always lived in this world. You belatedly realize that everyone has always been calling to you, asking to be your friend. However, you haven't been hearing those calls because they so often look like calls to war. Yet, hidden inside each one was this same call to friendship. You are thus faced with this poignant truth. You have been deceived by forms the call was hidden in, and so you did not hear it and had lost a friend who always wanted to be a part of you. How many friends have you lost who always wanted to be a part of you? To turn the unparalleled power of our learning toward the right lesson, then, all we have to do is sit before this question. Which world do I want to live in? Do I want to live in the jungle, red in tooth and claw, or do I want to live in a world in which everyone is softly asking to be my friend? As we struggle with forgiveness because it seems so hard, perhaps we can remember this simple question. Thank you so much for joining with me, day 355 with the Course Companions group. This is Robert Perry's commentary, The Simplicity of Salvation.